When you're talking about one of the criticisms of your administration was with tax cuts and with tariffs, you increased the deficit. So what was the strategy behind that? And did you think it was going to increase the deficit by a substantial amount?
Okay, we were ready to rock. It was all, I had a bad system. We had horrible tax policy. I made it great with a much lower tax rate. So I took it from almost 40% down to 21%. Now I'm bringing it from 21 down to 15, but only if you make your product in the United States, which is great. People call me, they said, what a great idea. Nobody ever heard of that before. I don't care if they make the product in Japan. Why should I give them? So it's at 21. That, at 21, in the first year, we took in much more revenue than we did at almost 40. Think of that. It inspired. Now, we had other things, too. We were able to get people to bring back their money. You couldn't bring back your money. If you had money in Europe, like Apple, Apple had many billions of dollars outside. They couldn't bring it. There was no way to bring it back in. The bureaucracy, the documents, the whole thing. And also the tax was too high. They wanted like half of it or something. Nobody's going to do that. So they leave their money in Japan and they spend their money there. That was part of what I did. The money came pouring back in. Apple took in hundreds of billions of dollars. They brought it back from overseas. They brought it in.
So how does the deficit increase because of that?
So what happened is this. We were ready to rock and roll, and then we had the COVID thing, and we had to focus on that. And if we didn't give some businesses a hand, you would have had a depression like in 1929. But we were ready to start. We would have very shortly been paying off debt. We have $35 trillion in debt. And I'll never forget it. It was talking about from, the standpoint of being in office. I'm in the Oval Office, and I have John McLaughlin and Fabrizio. They're two very good pollsters, probably, I don't know, I would say the two best, who knows, but very good pollsters. And we're starting to think about running for a second term. And we had the greatest economy in history. Never has there been an economy like this.
And you attribute that to lowering taxes and tariffs.
Two things. And also I cut regulations more than anybody else. And if I asked many of the businessmen, from the big companies, the guys running the big companies, I'd say, so if you had your choice, you've had it now for a long time, what's more important to you, the tax cuts, you paid less tax, or the regulation cuts? Every one of them said the regulation cuts meant more. Who would think that, right? Because you don't equate it to dollars, but it actually is more dollars. We had it going, and then we just had to focus on something else. But they were sitting there, these two pollsters were sitting there, and they said, sir, if George Washington came back and Abraham Lincoln was his VP as opposed to Waltz, how bad is he, by the way? But if Abraham Lincoln was his VP, they couldn't beat you. And I'll never forget it. The following day, they said, something's happening in China, sir. Could we meet? I said, what's happening? People are dying. And it was all around the Wuhan lab, by the way. There are pictures with little lines, their body bags, all around the Wuhan lab. And I always said that from the beginning, Joe. It was, they tried to say, first they said it was France, and they blamed everybody.
Right.
But then they say it was bats from a cave 2,000 miles away. So we got hit with that. And despite that, we had the best economy. And when I gave it over, the stock market was higher than it was pre-COVID. I mean, nobody could even believe it. But we saved it. And we were helping businesses. They were dying. They were dying.
So it's your belief that if you had a second term, given the policies in place, the way the economy was booming, that you would have been able to pay off a lot of the debt. And that was the strategy.
If we didn't have COVID, we would have been paying off debt, and we would have had, and don't forget, by growth, the word growth is actually more important in a way, because you could have the same debt, but if you doubled your growth, all of a sudden you're under-levered. But still, we should pay off debt. If you viewed this $35 trillion right now, it's a lot. But if you look at the asset value, if you looked at it purely as an asset value, we have oil underground, we have water, we have mountains, the assets are so enormous. But regardless of that, we've got $35 trillion in debt. We should pay it off. and we would have started paying off debt and probably even given further tax reductions. I want to get it down to 15%. We're going to do more business, but when you get hit with a COVID, everything stops, and you have to keep these businesses alive. The businesses were dying. I mean, they were just dying. This whole place, this country was going to die.
Are there influences outside of environmental that keep people from wanting to drill for oil and frack and do those sort of things outside of the environmental concerns, which are legitimate, of course?
No,
but are there other influences that may be over accentuate or over exaggerate these environmental effects? Are people being influenced in a way where they're trying to keep us from producing American oil?
Yeah. So the environmental is the biggest tool for stopping growth, the biggest tool. The other is regulation. And if you speak to Elon, he said the regulation now to send a rocket up to anywhere, even if you do everything, it's becoming impossible. But they use environmental in order to get people not to do anything. And sometimes I say, I look at some of I know the environmental stuff better because I had to build buildings in New York. I had to do environmental impact studies. And I would see some of these guys that I'd hire for a lot of money, environmentalists that would get you through the process. And they'd be up in Albany, that's the capital of New York, and they're up there trying to make it tougher for guys like me that were builders because they'd get paid more money. In other words, I had one guy, highly recommended. I was good at getting permits. I was one of the kings I was always very good. But the environmental stuff was always horrible. They could slow a project down 10 years, 15 years. I had a project in Louisiana, built big LNG plant. It was for 14 years. It was going to cost $18 billion, one of the biggest, like the Empire State Building, laying down on its side times 4. Massive on the coast, on the Gulf Coast. And they said, sir, they're going to give it up. I said, they shouldn't give it up. What's the problem? They can't get their environmental. They had environmental permits that would fill this whole room up to the ceiling. And they said there was one mistake on one little line. They want them to do it all over again. It's not going to happen. And I got them their permit instantly. And they built the plant. It's massive.
So when you're saying that, there's people that are making money by making it difficult.
Yeah.
Are you talking about lawyers?
No, I'm talking about environmental consultants and lawyers.
Environmental consultants profit off of dragging out the process.
Absolutely.